inflation will end up influencing the economy. So on paper, when we talk about inflation, it doesn't change anything. It's just numbers changing. The values don't change, because as prices go up, price of everything would go up. For example, if inflation is 10%, every price of everything, including labor, our wages, our electricity bill, our groceries, everything will go up by 10%. But that is in the long run. In the short run, there are lots of problems. And I don't know if we should call it a benefit, but let's see. So you can see inflation money growth. They kind of are correlated over the long run. Different countries. Now, hyperinflation, we talked about this. This is when everything is just out of control. Now, the Fisher equation. Remember when we said real interest rates and nominal interest rates? The Fisher equation basically tells us that the real interest rate that you get is only real after you deduct the inflation from it. Or in other words, the nominal interest rate I stands for interest rate equals R plus pi. Pi is inflation and R is the real interest rate, the rate of return you get for your money. This is economics. This is important. These are just accounting. These are just numbers. We don't care about them. But this is economics. The rate of return on investment. Every decision we take is because of this. We want a return. So your real interest rate, what you get on your investments, on your savings, when you lend money to people, is when you deduct inflation from the nominal interest rate. Example. This is a very important example. My friend, for example, asks me for a loan of $1,000, 5% interest rate. I give him. At the end of the year, I'm expecting 5% to be added to my money that I gave him. But then if inflation is 2%, 2% of my money's value is gone. So in reality, I'm only getting 3%. 5%, he adds on my money, but 2% of the value of my money is gone because of inflation. The Fisher effect occurs as a result of the Fisher equation. When expected inflation rises, interest rates will rise. Why? If you don't raise the nominal interest rates, when expected inflation rate goes up, this is something that you can expect on your exam. Questions like this. What happens if you don't change the nominal interest rate when inflation expectation is rising? When people expect a higher inflation. So if this goes up and this is a constant, what will happen to this? If this doesn't change, what will happen to this?
It has to go up too.
It has to go up, but what will happen if this doesn't change? It will go up. Yeah. So yeah. Sorry, I made a mistake here. Rewrite the Fisher equation. We care about this. This is economics. We want to have this fixed. Now, let's say this goes up and we don't change this. This remains a constant. What happens to real interest rate?
It would go down.
It will go down. And what will this mean? What will happen? What will happen? Back to chapter 2 and chapter 3. What will happen to savings if this goes down? Think about it.
Would savings increase if real interest rate went down?
So if I save my money, I'm expecting a rate of return on that money, right?
Yeah.
So if I know that that return, that real interest is going down, I will not be saving that much money anymore.
Okay.
Like you see, we are all facing this decision to consume or to save. At the end of the month, you always face this decision whether to save your money or you buy something nice that you always wanted to buy, but you were scared because like, yeah, let's just stop spending money, let us save money, things like that. The reason you save money is because you expect a high rate of return for that money. You save so that you can consume more in the future. A farmer savings, saving is farming. The most basic form of saving is when a farmer, instead of eating all his crop or her crop, planted some of them back into the ground for next year harvest. Because the farmer expects that next year he's going to get even more harvest and eat more and more crops than what he's putting in the ground right now, planting right now. If someone tells the farmer that next year there will be a drought, so your harvest next year will be gone, will the farmer plant for the next year for the drought? No. Same thing we face in this situation. When expected inflation goes up, if the government or the central bank, Federal Reserve, do not change the nominal interest rate, what happens to the real interest rate? It will go down. People will not save their money. They would take their money out of the banks. They would go on a spending cycle. For example, right now, people are buying homes, housing market going up. Because people have money on their hands and they want to get rid of that money. The money's value is falling and saving doesn't give them enough interest, so they want to convert that money into something else. So remember, I don't care about the monetary things or like the financial or accounting aspects. I care about the economic aspects. When I tell you something about when I ask you on the exam, for example, about the Fisher equation, what I want you to do is to use this equation and analyze your saving and consumption decisions. That is economics. That's economics. That's what matters. Should I save or should I consume? Should I buy myself that brand new car I always wanted, or should I save so that I can probably buy a house in like 5 years? If this goes down, if R goes down, I won't be able to afford that house in 5 years. So why bother? I would just buy that car for myself. I consume the car. Okay. Yep. Sure effect. Nominal interest rates rise along with expected inflation, but in shorter time periods, expected inflation and nominal interest rate do not always move together. Now, costs of inflation. As we said, Milton Friedman, the famous economist, he said that in the long run, inflation doesn't change anything. It's just numbers being changed. The value doesn't change. The decisions won't change. But in the short run, it changes a lot of things. Why? Because it has certain distortions. It creates chaos. And people will respond to chaos. That would inflict certain costs on them. Let's talk about these costs. Schuler costs. This is the most important one, in my opinion. Schuler costs is by what do we mean by Schuler costs? Schuler costs are costs in time and money that people have to suffer when they're facing inflation so that they can protect their assets from being devalued. For example, let's say I just went like to Vegas and I played some poker and I won $100,000. That never happens. At least not for me. I'm a horrible gambler. Thank God for that. But if that happens, I'm sitting on a pile of cash. And I hear on the news that inflation is rising. What would I do? I'll try to get rid of this cash to change it into something else, to buy a house or to, I don't know, like buy Bitcoins, all of this. And remember when we talked about markets, we always talked about that, say that markets, we assume that markets operate freely, but that's not the case. In many cases, there is a commission fee to use the market. For example, the housing market. If you want to buy a house, when you talk about supply and demand of that house, the price associated with a house is not the money that the buyer that the seller will receive. It's the housing market is not just you going to see a house and then paying some money to someone and then that person would give you the house. No, you have to pay commission to real estate agents who spend time researching, looking for houses, looking for buyers, calling people. Are you still interested in this piece of property? Or do you still want to sell this? And trying to connect buyers to sellers. Now, when there is higher inflation, people who normally wouldn't want to buy a house, they want to get rid of their cash because their cash is losing value. So what would they do? One thing that they do, for example, is buy a house. They have to pay real estate agents. They have to spend some time looking around, researching things. For example, in my country, we always have like high inflation. And the other day, my uncle asked me, like texted me and asked me, what is Bitcoin? And I was like, this is like a 65-year-old man who never had any dealing with the internet or things like that, just his phone and a few messaging apps to talk to his children and family. And he asked me, what is Bitcoin? Why? Because inflation rates are so high. He's probably is retired, so he has some cash in the bank savings, and he wants to get rid of that cash to transform it into something else, to convert it into something else. And Bitcoins are really interesting these days. So that's why he's spending time, and he will probably spend money paying someone some commission to convert his cash into Bitcoin or cryptocurrency. This is one of the costs of inflation. People will try to get rid of all the cash that they have. I have a friend of mine who was working at Tehran's stock exchange, and 2 years ago, when we had this sign of inflation, he said something really interesting. He, like on a group chat with all my friends, he said that to another person who was asking him for financial advice. He said that if you have some money, just go spend it. Go eat out in a fancy restaurant. Go eat somewhere expensive. Just get rid of that money, because if you don't eat it, that money is going to be eaten by inflation. Inflation will eat it. Just get rid of your money. And getting rid of your money means sugar costs. So the second form of costs are menu costs. On paper, when we talk about menu costs, remember, like imagine this restaurant that you have like cheeseburgers and steaks. Each one has different price, like $5 for a cheeseburger and $10 for a steak. After inflation, however, because money's worth went down, you have to increase your prices. So your cheeseburger, which was $5, now should be $7, and your steak should be $15. You have to print new menus. That is the menu costs. The old menus, no longer useful. You have to throw them out, order new menus, and print them and prepare them. These will all cost money. In more detail, remember when we talked about labor contracts? All these labor contracts, all these like different business contracts that these huge corporations, when two big corporations sign a contract, that's the result of like probably a year of negotiating. That costs a lot of money. You have to pay advisors and consultants. You have to do a lot of work so that you have your numbers correct, and then you sign this deal with another company. And you really depend on that. But if inflation changes the numbers on that contract, you have to renegotiate it. You have to sign a new one. And in these situations, of course, everybody would want to take advantage. So you have to renegotiate it. At least in my experience, like when we had to deal with this, not only the other side, but also our side, we all try to like renegotiate it in our favor. So again, we had to spend some time, wasting lots of money to have the same situation that we had like last year. Nothing changed, we gained nothing, but just menu costs. We signed, changed our contracts and everything, and we gained nothing. Nothing changed, and we had to spend some money. That's menu costs. It hurts companies, it hurts businesses, especially when we talk about small businesses, family-owned businesses, these businesses that are running on a tiny profit margin. Menu costs could hurt them a lot. Another one is tax distortions. What happens with tax distortions? Remember, no, remember, we never talked about this. If you look at the tax code in many countries, you have, for example, this law that if you're making under $400,000, you don't need to pay this much tax. But if you're making more than $400,000, your tax rate would go up a lot because you're considered super rich or very rich. If you're making more than $1 million, I think in some countries, tax rate for incomes above $1 million a year is like 95%, something like that. So what happens with inflation is that on paper, your income went up, but not in reality. Like I told you that where I'm from, there is this joke. We talk about poor millionaires, people who have like $1 million of our currency, but they're very poor because that million doesn't mean anything. 30 years ago, 40 years ago, with that 1 million currency, you could have bought like a couple of houses. It was like $1 million. But not today. Today, with 1 million currency, you can't even get a decent phone. Like you would have to spend at least 3 million to get a decent phone. So on paper, numbers went up, but not in reality. Your value didn't change. But now you're obligated to pay more taxes, even though you're not richer. By law, you're considered richer, so you have to pay more taxes. This hurts a lot of people, except one. Who doesn't it hurt?
The government.
The government. And who causes inflation?
The government.
Yeah. So this is something that, of course, if like responsible governments immediately address this issue, but some governments, they cause one problem and then they profit from it by creating a second problem, and then they profit again by creating a third problem. In fact, in macroeconomics, inflation is a form of tax for certain situations. The most basic one, when a government prints money, it's creating money out of nowhere. What happens? In reality, the government is getting value from every single person's pockets into his own pocket. That's inflation tax. If you like Google it, inflation as a tax. Inflation is a form of tax. 1,000 years ago, when some king wanted to go to war with his cousin, probably over some hill or a river, he needed money because wars are very expensive. And when he went to people and said, like, how about you guys pay me more taxes? They immediately rejected him. So what these kings did was that they debased their currency. Remember I told you that the picture of a king on a coin, or the signature of a minister of finance or head of Federal Reserve on a banknote, that represents the guarantee of that institution. That government guarantees the value of this money, this piece of paper. So what they did is that they debased it. For example, a gold coin, they would have been giving people gold coins, but then instead of minting a gold coin from coin, they put 50% copper. Copper is much cheaper, and you wouldn't notice if they did it carefully. So in reality, by debasing the currency, the governments move money from people's pockets into their own pocket. That's inflation tax. In some more complicated situations, we have this, for example, if like a situation when the governments have a lot of debt, that's also another form of inflation tax. If you have a lot of debt, even if you don't print money, by increasing money supply and devaluing the currency, you're devaluing your own debts. If I owe you $100 and I have the power to change the value of dollar, I would reduce the value of dollar so that I would owe you less. On paper, I still owe you $100, but last year with $100, you could have bought yourself, I don't know, like 100 cheeseburgers. This year with $100, you can only buy 20 cheeseburgers. So I won. Now I owe you less value. These are the government's issues with inflation. And this is why World Bank recommends, I don't remember exactly, was it World Bank recommendation or IMF, that heads of central banks can operate independently from political establishment, so that the president cannot order the head of the central bank around or appoint his cousin. For example, in the United States, you have this like very good law that the president cannot just appoint anybody that he wants to. He can't just come up with some person from the street who like him or who donated to his campaign and then put him on as the head of the Central Federal Reserve. He has to recommend to Senate, and then the Senate would vote. Do we need this or do we not? In many other countries, presidents just appoint heads of central banks. And because of all those things that I told you about, like governments causing inflation and then benefiting from inflation, that doesn't end well. So these are tax distortions. Increased variability of relative price. What happens is that, again, we're facing decisions, what to buy, where to invest. And inflation creates chaos. Some prices would go very high. Some prices don't change a lot. Remember, inflation is an average, the average increase in prices. Some prices always increase much faster than others. So when we're facing inflation, we're also facing uncertainty. Now you have variability of relative prices, this relative to that. Looked for this meme. Yeah, here. I wanted to show you this. Right now, lumber is very expensive. When lumber prices go back to normal. This perfectly explains the situation. You're facing variability of relative prices. This person thought lumber are going to stay very expensive for a long time. So he bought a lot of lumber. Now lumber prices went back to normal. Now he has to spend some money, spend some time, carry all the lumber in a very dangerous way back somewhere and sell it. This person, of course, this is a joke, but if it was real, this person would have lost a lot. This would have cost him a lot. So increased variability of relative prices, and of course the last one, loss of the dollar yardstick. The dollar yardstick. When we say something is $100, that's the yardstick. This is in our brain. We have an assigned value to the money. Something is this much expensive. But when dollar prices change, this would change everything. The example that textbooks use is that, for example, assume there is an inflation for miles. We always, like in our head, we all know that if you're driving and you go like 60 miles per hour, that's considered fast. But what if the government creates some kind of a speed inflation so that 60 miles per hour would be actually like less than that, like 50 miles per hour? This would change everything. Our like the value that we assign to things. Another example, think about something that's going up, for example, lumber or Bitcoin or houses. What if I tell you that these prices aren't going up? The price of dollar is going down. The price of dollar is going down. They're not really becoming more expensive. It's the dollar that's becoming cheaper. That's what we call loss of the dollar yardstick. Why is it important? Assume this couple, like two young spouses, they are saving for retirement. Excuse me. They are saving for retirement. Right now, you could go see the world. You could travel to the South Pole, everywhere. But instead, you're saving money. You're putting away these dollars so that when you're old, you can enjoy more dollars. When the value of that dollar as a yardstick goes down, you cannot make that rational and smart decision that you were taking before. Now everything changed. You would wonder, okay, if I get $1 million after retirement, that's good. But what if $1 million in that year will be like $100,000 this year? Will that be also good? What should I do? Should I save? Should I start a business? Should I change my job? What should I do? And this is a very serious question. Many people, like not my age, but a few years down the road, they would have to start thinking about it very seriously. That what would I do? So these are the costs of inflation. Now, costs from unanticipated inflation. We have inflation that we know is happening. That's okay because companies can prepare themselves. They can renegotiate their contracts. They can, all those costs we talked about. It's when people know that this is happening. When people are surprised, when you wake up in the morning and you see the government just printed money out of thin air and created money from heavens, and now you're facing unexpected inflation? Uncertainty. Nobody knows what to do. One day, everybody will be crazy about gold. They will all go to precious metal market, buy gold, buy gold. Then tomorrow someone says, there is something else. There is a guy who is creating money on the internet. Let's go and buy his stuff. Then everybody would go and buy the internet money. Then another day, someone would say, hey, I started this company that is in, what was the name of that company in England? The South Spanish Sea? It was this phony company they created in England. Someone would create something again somewhere and advertise it, then everybody would be crazy to buy that. That would create a lot of problems. A lot of problems. Uncertainty. Remember, everything is about risk here. When we talk about profits, we're talking about expected profits. For example, if you're a company, you want to start like, I don't know, selling wires. What you care about before you approve this production line are the numbers that market analysis gives you, demand analysis, all of that. So that at the end of the year, you're expecting this much profit. Otherwise, why would you waste money and time to produce something that's not going to give you some profits? Uncertainty creates risks. People, you, me, everyone, we assume we are risk averse. We have two different types of risk takers: risk averse, risk neutral, and risk loving. Risk averse are the vast majority of people. People don't like risks. If I give you, let's say, $100 for certain, or $110, but only 10% chance, and $90 with like 10% chance, and the rest, the $100, you would go for the 100% $100 because there is no risks involved. You're not, you don't enjoy risks. You want to try to avoid them. That's why people buy car insurance. They don't want the risk. I mean, for example, I spent like a couple of $1,000, the price of a used car, on car insurance all my life. And I only once used that car insurance service. That was like when I just started driving. Why do I do it? Of course, it's the law, but if it wasn't the law, we'll still get it, because I don't want the risk to be always scared when I'm driving. Oh my God, if I hit someone, I have to pay like $1 million. So people don't like risks, and unanticipated inflation creates uncertainty. This creates a lot of bad decisions and chaos, and it would generally bring down the economic activity. Increased variability of relative prices, we talked about. Higher inflation uncertainty when the level of inflation is higher. Inflation is always a form of risk. When inflation is 5%, that's high, but still, what could go wrong? 5% could be like 10% for some business and 0% for another. For example, lumber could go up by 10%, while milk would go up by 0%. That's not too bad. But when inflation is 50%, it's chaos. Something is going up 300%, something is going down 50%. No one knows what's happening. And it will make it worse and worse and worse when inflation rates goes up. Now, I use this example of driving. Inflation is how fast you're driving above the speed limit. You shouldn't do that. Inflation should be zero. You shouldn't devalue money. But we all do that. Like whenever you're on the road and the speed limit is 65, sometimes you go 66, 67, maybe even 70 if you're young and if the song is good. You may even go 70. That's 5% 5% inflation above the speed limit. If you're doing 10 miles per hour above the speed limit, you should be worried. You should be worried. That's 10% inflation rate. But if you're doing 40 miles above the speed limit, like 40% inflation rate, you need to be stopped. You should be lucky. You'll be lucky if the cops pull you over. If you're doing like 110 and 70, that's like one mistake by you, or even if you're the best driver in the world, by someone else, disaster. The same situation applies to inflation. When inflation rates gets to 40, 50%, uncertainty rises so much that it's very dangerous. Like people with one mistake, or even just out of pure luck, they could lose everything overnight. If you invest your money on something and then price of everything else goes up by 100%, the price of what you put your money on goes up by 20%, you're done. You lost everything. So this is the costs of unanticipated inflation. And you don't need to worry about the appendix. These are like more accounting stuff. The appendix will not be on the exam, and you're not responsible for the appendix. Just remember what we mean by inflation. Why do we care about it? It's not just financial. It has certain real economic costs. It's not just a monetary thing. Fisher effect. And also this part. This part is very important. You'll definitely will get at least 1 or 2 questions from this. Did I cover this one? Oh yeah, I forgot to cover this one. So this part. Yeah, this is what happens when nobody turns on his camera. I constantly, because the only person I'm seeing is myself, I cannot focus properly. So if you notice, I'm really not focused today, is because no one has turned on his camera. I don't see anybody, and I'm talking to myself. Yeah, thanks. So, theory of inflation can be obtained by rewriting the equation of exchange. I won't ask you to prove this on the exam. Don't worry about it. what does inflation mean? This is the changes in percentage. And inflation is the change in price levels. Remember, inflation, what we mean by inflation is how much prices has changed. So this is inflation. And of course, it's a percentage, 5% inflation rate, for example. This means prices in total, on average, divided by P1 multiplied by 100, increased by 5%. Assume money velocity is constant. Money velocity is just a number, it's constant. When something is a constant, how much does it change from this year to next year?
It doesn't change.
It doesn't change. So what will be this? If it doesn't change, this means that V2 will be equal to V1. So how much will be this?
0.
Yes. So this is 0. What you're left with is this. This is inflation, delta P, change in prices. Therefore, you can write inflation is equal to percentage change in money supply minus percentage change in output. Excuse me. This is important. Percentage pi equal the quantity theory of inflation indicates that the inflation rate equals the growth rate of the money supply minus the growth rate of aggregate output. If you have 2% GDP growth, you have to increase money supply by 2%, because now you have 2% more goods on the market. If you do that, inflation will be 0. If you don't do that, inflation would be in negative. When there is an increase in output, not followed by an increase in the quantity of money supply, you will have deflation. That's a very rare case. So whenever you have increase in output or economic growth, you have to increase the amount of money supply available by the same amount to keep all the prices constant, to keep inflation 0. So increasing money supply is not necessarily a bad thing. When people have more goods and more services available, you want to have increase in money supply on the same level so that you can keep the prices the same. If you don't do that, you'll have negative inflation or deflation. And deflation will have all these costs that we talked about. Again, prices are going down. You have to change your menus. You have to renegotiate your contracts. When prices are going down, people would not consume. Because if you don't consume now, if you save your money, you're going to enjoy a lot more in the future. Things are going to be cheaper. If you keep your $100 in your pocket, next year you can buy more stuff with it. So you will not consume. everybody would save. What happens when nobody consumes? What will happen to unemployment rate when people stop consumption?
Goes up.
Goes up. If no one comes to my restaurant, I'll fire everybody and close down my business. Then economic activity would go down. So deflation can be worse than inflation. So all these like questions that I asked, you on the exam you'll be given these kind of questions. You'll have this. I will give you a situation, and then I will ask you to say, okay, this goes up, this goes down. What happens to inflation if it goes up or goes down? And then what will happen to my saving and investment and consumption decisions? Yep. Any questions? Did I make sense?
Mhm.
Thank you. Okay, so this is chapter 5, and tomorrow is your exam. So I won't be starting chapter 6 now. Let's end it here if there's no question. If you want, I can stay. If you have any questions, I can stay and help you with homeworks or preparing for the exam tomorrow. If not, that's enough for today. Tomorrow will be exam day. I will make your exam available. I'll try to make it available as early as possible in the morning, but you'll have the whole day to take the exam. You'll have 24 hours to take your exam. But I will try to put a time limit on it. I still haven't figured it out on the Moodle page to